On today's episode of Granworks, I install several Power over Ethernet IP security cameras. Stay tuned. Well, we got robbed a few weeks ago. Some thief came into our backyard and stole a couple of bikes right off our back patio while we were sleeping. Yeah, that's profoundly disturbing, and it didn't take long for me to order some security cameras after that. Consumer cameras are cheaper and more plug and play, but they don't work for me. Their resolution is 1080p HD at best, most can't handle the AZ heat, and worst of all, most also require a cloud subscription to do anything really useful. No thank you. So I went with a set of Lorex LNB4421 Power over Ethernet IP bullet cameras. They are commercial grade, have a resolution of 4 megapixels, which is twice the resolution of 1080p HD, can handle temps up to 140 degrees, and, maybe most importantly, are completely and utterly controlled by me. On the downside, they aren't all that easy to install, certainly not as much as, say, a wireless Arlo. You'll see what I mean. I need to know where to install these outside, but I run into a little bit of a chicken and the egg right up front. The issue is that these need to be connected to a Ethernet cord, in other words, get to the network. These are IP cameras, the only way to see what's on them is through the network. But since it's not wireless, this cord needs to somehow be connected to my network. Now in the end, I'm going to run it through the attic here, but again, it's kind of chicken and the egg. I need to know where to run the cord to wherever, to get the network to the camera, but to know where to actually put the camera to run it to, I need to see it already connected to the network, if that makes sense. What to do? The solution I came up with is to effectively turn this temporarily into a wireless camera. And the way I do it is start with this. This is an Asus RT-N66U. It is a standard wireless router, but one advantage of this is that you can actually install open source firmware on this, and I have on here Tomato. Why that matters is then I can actually turn this into a wireless client. Specifically, this is in wireless Ethernet bridge mode. Therefore, this becomes a wireless client, it connects to my network inside the house, and then it turns anything that's plugged into it into essentially a wireless client. So the next step then is to actually take a Power over Ethernet router. This one gets plugged into my wireless adapter, thus meaning anything plugged into here also becomes wireless. And because it's Power over Ethernet, that's what can actually power the camera. So now, if I have the camera plugged in Power over Ethernet, and I have the switch, Power over Ethernet switch, plugged into my wireless router, and the wireless router is connected to the network inside the house, that means this camera should now be wireless and accessible over the network via any normal thing. Now that the camera is connected to the network, I need to know its IP, and so it's off to the main router. I find the right one using the MAC address, which is on the camera itself. The host name isn't reliable really, unless you're only setting up one camera at a time. With that IP, I log into the camera's web interface. The default username and password for the Lorex camera is admin and admin. Yeah, that's not secure at all. Thankfully, it does require you to change it after the first login. Next up is the video setting page. Make sure the substream is enabled with an encode mode of MJPEG for maximum compatibility. Then, the final information comes from the network connection page. Make a note of what the RTSP port is. It's a 554 by default. Then, copy off the format of the RTSP URL. Note the subtype equals 1 in my example here. That will be critical for testing in a little bit. Armed with my custom monitoring URL, I fire up VLC on my iPhone and swipe over to the network streams. I then type in the URL that I copied off in the previous step, and Bob's your uncle. I can now see a live feed from my camera directly fed into my phone. Now we're back to why I wanted to jump through all those hoops in the first place. And so I can figure out where to permanently mount the camera. I do this by having a live feed of what the camera sees on my phone and then mount that phone in a mic stand. I can then move it from place to place until I find a location that has the coverage that I want, because I can see exactly what the camera sees. It's important to use the sub-channel for this, because VLC doesn't handle the default MPEG-4 streams from the Lorex, but does handle MJPEG flawlessly. And the lower quality doesn't matter at all for this stage of the installation. I permanently mount the cameras using some appropriate screws. The kit actually comes with some screws and drywall anchors,
but I'm going directly into lumber here, so there's no need for those. The live stream comes in handy again for fine-tuning the angles before tightening them down. Now this camera kit comes with a 100-foot long Cat5e Ethernet cable, all tightly wrapped in a coil. This has an amazing tendency to want to tangle up on itself, so I thought it was worth the time to try and uncoil it properly. To do this, I put one end under a heavy weight and then let the coil spin freely on a pipe. As I walk away, the cable uncoils itself in the opposite way that it was originally coiled, and so it comes out straight. This is extremely effective with Romex electrical wire and even semi-rigid Ethernet cable, but as I discovered, not quite as effective with flexible Ethernet like this. This method lessens the tangling after the fact, but it doesn't at all eliminate it, and you don't want to do this beforehand. So yeah, don't do it exactly like this. Instead, keep it on the coil as long as possible and have a helper hold the pipe or dowel or rod or whatever you have in the coil while you're doing the actual run. That way it gets uncoiled directly when it's being pulled into the attic, and so it'll be almost tangle proof at that stage. There are two distinct ends to the supplied Ethernet cable, and one side has a very handy combination strain relief and sealing mechanism. You just screw it on, and the connection is very tight and resists the elements. It's pretty slick. I'm pretty paranoid though, so I took the extra step of also wrapping the entire thing in electrical tape, just to make certain everything is contained and snug. I used a 5/8" spade bit to drill a hole into my attic and then started feeding the plain end of the cable up into it. The idea was for me to go into the attic and just start pulling the already uncoiled cable through. I hadn't yet learned to keep the coil intact until the last possible moment, so this particular pull was unnecessarily difficult. And here's where I'm mentally psyching myself to go up into the attic. It's mid-October at this point, and so the temperature is quite a bit lower than it had been earlier, but you know, that's all relative. This is what my attic looked like that day using my thermal camera. Each of those pretty colors is a different temperature ranging from 140 degrees to 165 degrees. That's 63 to 73 degrees for the metric inclined. Yeesh. It's funny to watch video of this after the fact, because honestly it doesn't look very hot. But nah, just imagine being in a sauna the entire time. It's just that you're not naked, you're not sitting still on a bench, you're having to wear a respirator, you're probably face deep into insulation. Yeah, it's all of the heat of the sauna with none of the fun. In all seriousness, heat stroke is a very real danger up there. So after almost passing out cabling the first camera, I took a lot of preventive steps for all the rest. That included shorter trips, trying not to move as much, going later in the evening, and also trying out some portable fans. So yeah, this first run was no fun at all. My house had hip roofs, so every camera is installed near an eave where the roof gets extremely narrow. That meant that I had to get flat on my stomach and inch as close to the eave as possible. My face is buried in insulation the entire time, and so visibility is terrible. A respirator was a must, even though that the restricted airflow combined with the hot, humid air in it made it kind of difficult to breathe. Yeah, no fun at all. I did have a helper untangle the cable from the outside. This proved to be critical because no matter what, that cable would find some way of tangling itself if I tried to do everything myself. In future runs, I attached the end of the cable to a 5-foot length of somewhat rigid 12-gauge wire. I then pushed the wire attached to the cable through the hole into the attic. This essentially pushed the end of the cable several feet into the attic, rather than pulling it near the eave like pushing the flexible cable on its own did. That allowed me to get within kneeling distance of the eaves for all the rest of the cameras, which was infinitely better than having to go on my stomach. Back outside, I made sure to staple the exposed cable in multiple places to keep it secure. I think it was around 90 degrees at this point, but boy did that feel good. I try to keep my equipment closet future-proof, so that means using conduit to bridge the gap between it and the attic. I also use 2-inch PVC as smaller diameters have proved to be a little too future limiting. Getting multiple Ethernet cables through the conduit is trivial with a pull cord, so the first step is getting the pull cord installed. I have a full video on doing just that, link in the doobly-doo, but here's a real-time instance. In short, you attach something like a bag or a balloon to the end of a pull cord and just suck it through the conduit with a shop vac.
I think it is!
Simple. That first pull cord should be considered a starter cord of sorts. The idea is to attach any cable you want pulled through the conduit to the existing pull cord, but to always include a new length of pull cord with the bundle. In this case, I have 4 Ethernet cables for the 4 cameras I'm starting out with. I'm using official pull cord material, but honestly, most type of string will work just fine. Everything is bundled together, and then I make sure to wrap everything together using electrical tape. I try to narrow it down to a point as much as possible to make it easier to kind of slide through the conduit. The more lines you have in a conduit, the more you'll need to use some kind of lubricant. There is an insane amount of friction and heat caused by the cable jackets rubbing against each other over any notable distance. I've had some previous cable runs that were completely impossible without using any kind of lubricant. But with the lubricant, that was pretty easy. I'm really liking the foam-based lubricants now, since they're far less messy than the gels, but still do a fantastic job. I just spray some into the conduit opening, and the idea is that the cable will lubricate itself as it goes through it. All that done, I'm ready for the actual pull. I have a helper down below slowly pull on the starter pull cord while I'm up in the attic guiding the bundle through and making sure it doesn't tangle. It's very straightforward. After it's all the way through, I stuffed a scrap piece of memory foam into the conduit to seal it off in an effective but temporary manner. I can always remove it later when I pull through additional cables. And that's it for the attic, finally. I now have the taped up cable bundle down where I want it, so it's a simple matter to strip off the electrical tape and then kind of put aside my starter pull cord for any future new conduit runs. I then plug in the 4 cables into my power over Ethernet switch. It's very satisfying to see each of the cameras come online one at a time after all that. And that's it for the physical installation. They are now available over the network, so all future work is going to be at a software level. Stay tuned for a comparison between iSpy, Blue Iris, and ZoneMinder. And as always, thanks for watching.